Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Eddie Power, and he is the medical strategist and CEO of Empower. And we talk about the future MSL and how the role is going to evolve. It's a great conversation. I know you guys are going to love this. So don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn. There's a lot of announcements and content that gets posted, including the MSL Talk live schedule. So MSL Talk Live is a panel discussion once a month. So check out listings and times for that, and hopefully you can join us. So thanks for being here and for all your support. Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey there, Eddie. Welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm good, Tom. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh yeah. I'm excited. And guys, I like to give a little background. So Eddie and I have kind of known each other over the years from, just industry conferences. And, this dude is like, he's well known in the conference community. You always see Eddie's name as a speaker, contributor. So he's definitely a guest that I am excited to have on. And I just saw him at MAPS in Puerto Rico, and we had a chance to catch up live. And I'm like, let's just get a date. So here we are. We have a really exciting topic to share with you. But before we get into it, Eddie, why don't you do an introduction?
Sounds good, Tom. And thank you for the kind words. Likewise, for you as well. Always a fixture at these congresses and meetings. But, for me, 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry, primarily medical affairs, worked across 7 different companies from small to large, most recently with Pfizer on a wild COVID ride. And then, about a year ago, I set up my own consultancy, Empower Medical, and 12 months on, here we are and enjoying a new phase in my life. So, like I said, medical affairs, some clinical development roles, and some strategic marketing roles. So for me, it's just afforded a broad view of the pharma industry, how it operates, but more importantly, how medical affairs and MSLs can add value.
Yep. Awesome. And before we jump into it, we have a sponsor for today's episode. And for any aspiring MSLs that are struggling to break into their first medical science liaison position, consider joining the Aspire MSL program. This episode sponsored by MSL Mastery. That's a program that Sarah Snyder and I put together, which is an online course, step-by-step guide for those that are really struggling to get into the industry as an MSL. Just go to mslmastery.com and look for Aspire MSL, and we'd love to talk to you about it. So, and we're going to talk about the future. The whole topic today is the future of the MSL and what the role is going to look like. So I guess the best way to start maybe is, and I'm curious to hear from you, Eddie, what factors do you think are going to affect the MSL role and its trajectory and where it's going?
Absolutely. Many people don't realize that the role started back in 1967, would you believe? And it started as part of the commercial organization, the marketing organizations that these companies decided they needed people who actually had some medical knowledge and could speak more in depth. And we've seen a transition over that time period to more of a medical focus. But when I look at the trends today, right, there's a couple that really spring to mind. One is the whole area of data analytics, advanced and predictive analytics, and how MSLs can actually leverage those to really focus, identify, and engage on the right healthcare professionals, whatever they may look like, right? We I think, have moved from more of an academic focus, and by that I mean those key opinion leaders who published or presented at Congress, to now beginning embracing those who may never go to Congress or may never publish, but are actually dealing with patients, right, every day. And then the second piece that's coming that is the buzzword, right? Is artificial intelligence, and what does that mean? And there's so many facets in there. But, I'm really interested at the moment in the application of artificial intelligence at the point of care,
Mm,
because now those decisions are going to be made by an algorithm, and healthcare professionals will be informed by that algorithm. And then what does that mean for the traditional type of MSL role, where very much predicated on a one-on-one interaction, where the healthcare professional was a decision maker. And now you've got AI coming in and effectively taking over at least some of that decision making. So those are kind of the two big changes that I see, moving forwards, that will impact the MSL role and what that may look like in the future.
yeah, and it's interesting, as you said, I think we all realize that AI is the thing, and it's going to have a profound effect on probably all of our jobs in some way, shape,
Right.
or form. But do you think, and like, how quickly do you think the decision makers, the KOLs, the physicians, and the medical community is going to adopt the um, algorithm in the decision making process? Because I feel like, physicians, many, I was a rep for 10 years, so I have a good understanding of how it works. They want to make the call. So
Sure.
do you think AI is going to be a reference guide, or do you literally think they're going to be like, well, I'm going into my AI tool and it's going to tell me what to do and I'm following the protocol that comes from AI, or is it just too soon to know?
I think it's going to depend initially on the specialty and on the role of the
Mm,
healthcare provider. I think what we're seeing at the moment is more early adoption in, I'm going to call it the device space, right? So
hmm
we're seeing approvals in medical imaging for AI-driven analysis of, X-rays, MRI scans, CT scans, and it's the algorithm that's reading those and in essence coming up with a decision. And where I see some of the early adoption may be, areas like emergency rooms, where things
mm,
are fed quickly into systems to come up, not necessarily with a definitive diagnosis, but more, here's the top two or three things that you should be thinking about.
yeah.
Um, and then if you start taking that step forwards into the pharma drug side of things rather than device side of things, it may be, well, here are some of the treatment options that we need to consider. And the other big area, I think, Tom, is on the diagnosis side of things, and that delay in diagnosis, where rare disease springs to mind as an example, where patients are often misdiagnosed over a number of years. And AI can really speed up that diagnosis. And I'm sure that healthcare professionals will embrace and adopt that because it's actually helping their clinical decision making.
Well, and that's a great point. And by the way, that's a great answer to like a almost impossible question. It was almost like a trick question. It's like, how are we going to know? We don't
How are we
know
gonna know?
inside the minds of KOLs, of course, but
Right.
I'm just kind of speaking hypothetically. But I love that answer because I do think that there are so many undiagnosed patients out there. There's these ultra rare diseases that there's people walking around and there might be something available for those people. It's just that they don't really know what they have. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So getting back to the MSL and how the MSL might look in the future, do you feel that there may be some necessary credentials for the future MSL that may be different from what we have today?
Yeah, my experience in the past has been that MSLs have some kind of doctoral degree
Mhm.
in whatever form or fashion. And for me, the more that the healthcare profession evolves, I see the MSLs kind of matching that.
Hmm.
So, you have pharmacists who may not be PharmDs, but may be critical in, say, formulary committees. You may have nurses who are managing patients and are a rich source of insights because they're often not only the front line, but the first line in terms of any adverse events or how a patient is responding. So I almost see we should be mirroring what's happening in the healthcare community. You've got in the US at least more physician assistants, more nurse practitioners who are critical, right, in managing patient care. And the more we kind of get away, for me, the doctoral thing is obviously a good thing, but in a way was a legacy of an academic approach.
Hmm.
And now it's more, let's think of medical affairs and MSLs as being a little bit more applied, perhaps is the phrase I use, and really being engaged in what patient care looks like.
Mm.
That's kind of one of the key things that I see moving forwards in terms of credentials.
Yep. No, I got you. It makes sense. It makes sense. And again, a lot of these questions are hypothetical. We don't know. We're just really guessing. But, I appreciate that the ability to kind of look at the trends and see where things are going and how things are evolving. And, one of the other things I was thinking about is, as we look at AI, that certainly could be um, a very beneficial thing. But what other things do you think what changes might occur that would make the role of the MSL better?
Yeah. So one of the things that I see, I mentioned analytics before. So advanced and
Mhm.
predictive analytics, I think will be a really useful and a helpful tool. And what I mean by that is that today, right, you can look at unmet medical needs, however you want to define it. It could be time from diagnosis to treatment. It could be adherence to treatment. It could be undiagnosis or misdiagnosis in rare disease, but today with those analytics, you can actually see which HCPs or which clinics are treating the majority of patients.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then, an MSL can basically identify a list of healthcare professionals to engage with based on those analytics. So you can enhance patient care if there's an HCP that's treating 200 patients and there's another one in the next zip code that's treating five. I think as an MSL, I would focus on the one that's treating the majority of patients because you're more likely to have an impact, right, in patient care.
Mm.
And it makes an MSL time, I think, more efficient, more focused. And using those same analytics, you can also start showing impact over time.
It's funny, as you're talking about it, that's what I was thinking. Like there's this dilemma that goes on. We have this conversation all the time on this podcast, the dilemma of how do MSLs show their value? How does medical affairs show its value when there is no system of tracking sales like on the
Right?
commercial side, because that's not what you're judged on. But when you say that the advancements that are happening in analytics could show impact, I mean, do you think that the future of the MSL um, performance tracking could go back to this concept?
Absolutely. If you take an example, right, it could be diagnosis to treatment and what
Mm.
that time period is. And particularly if it's an acute disease like an infection, COVID, right, you name it, where you need treatment as quickly as you can. If those analytics show you that certain HCPs or clinics are taking 8 days, for example, to treatment, you can focus your medical education, your medical communication, your MSL efforts on that, and then see after a period of time if those 8 days have been reduced. And I think that's such a valuable and almost like a kind of hard metric that medical affairs has always struggled with. But it works both ways, right? Because If there's no impact, if there's no change, then it tells you whatever we're doing isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be, do we need to change the message? Do we need to change the content? Do we need to refocus medical education?
Mm-hmm.
If there's a change, then there may not be a direct cause correlation, but directionally, you're starting to show some value and starting to show some shift there. And to me, it's something that an MSL, can take and show, hey, look, here's what we've done. We're seeing an impact. What we're doing is actually adding value, and at the end of that, it's actually improving patient outcomes.
And that, I think that's what the medical affairs division, the industry has been really looking for, I think, for so many years. So, I mean, I know that that would be an awesome addition, or something to just look forward to at some point in time in the future. Now, we've spent some time talking about how things might evolve for the better. So when you look at the MSL role, do you see challenges or do you see difficulties in the future for this role?
So the biggest challenge, which is also an opportunity, is if you take the MSL role traditionally, it's always been focused on individual engagements primarily,
Mm-hmm.
one-on-ones, right? And occasionally there may be a group meeting or an advisory board meeting. And those engagements and the insights coming from those engagements were really the primary source for pharma companies. With the explosion of data and now artificial intelligence, right, that's able to mine those data, the challenge becomes, how do you fit that individual insight into something broader that can now be validated by analytics, by artificial intelligence. So for the MSL, it's to recognize, is this really just an anecdote that I'm hearing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting in the system? Or do I look at it as in two ways, right? I can be a scout, and this is, I think of it on safety terms, right? Like an early warning system or a signal detection system that I need to take back to the organization. Hey, this is what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have a look at it, and we can validate it through whatever data lakes, right, and analytics we want to do. Or we can work the other way around, where if you're getting these trends coming out of these data lakes and these analytics, then the MSL can take those and go back and use that information and say, hey, is this something that you're seeing in your world, in your clinical practice? Is it real or is it not real? And it starts passing out by taking that approach where potentially you need to focus, say, more medical education or more communication, and even use things as case studies, right? This is what's working well in this geography, and it's not working well here. Can we connect some of those different geographies? So that's the challenge, right? Is to get out of that very focused, almost in the weeds is not the right thing, but you're very focused in a particular geography in a particular area, but then start connecting those dots
Mm.
across the whole MSL organization, to share best practices, right? And to share what may not have worked.
Right. And I think that goes on now, but I think it's going to be more important in the future. And I want to get back to this conversation or just mention, because AI keeps coming up. It came up again. Like, do you think that the MSL role is in jeopardy because of artificial intelligence?
So I actually think the opposite. I think it can be enhanced by artificial intelligence, because going back to the unmet medical need example we were talking about, AI can identify all of those and can, I think, really focus where engagements are needed and where there are unmet medical needs,
Hmm.
and unmet gaps in patient care. But also, I can envision a situation where if you're having a conversation and you're showing some data or some information on an iPad, and there's a question that's asked by the person that you're engaging with, and AI can have, say, like a pop-up to come up and say, we've had this question before, and here's how to respond to it.
Mm.
Well, wouldn't that be fantastic, like from an MSL, because you can then start addressing things in real time. And it's not let me go back and get back to you with my answer or with my questions. And I think as healthcare evolves, we talked about AI at point of care. There's going to be, I think, much more real time evidence coming up that I think AI will help an MSL to manage and embrace.
Yeah. Well, that's good news, guys. You heard it here. AI
Absolutely.
is not going to kill the MSL role. You heard it here first.
That's right.
And look, I don't say that to get controversial. I don't say that to be negative or be a fear monger. I just think it's something that I get that question. People ask me that question all the time. And I'm have a vested interest in the career of the MSL. That's what I do for a living. It's funny, people don't realize, like, I don't just do a podcast for a living. I'm actually an MSL recruit. Like, I have a recruiting business. So without MSLs, I don't have a recruiting business, guys. I'll still have a podcast, I guess, maybe, I don't know. But I'm glad to hear you say that, in your opinion, AI is going to enhance the role. So I guess the next question, as we look at the um, the career of the MSL and how it evolves, what changes do you see as far as, like, do you see new titles emerging or responsibilities? Like, how does it grow from here?
Yeah, so I do see different types of roles. I think the one size fits all approach is probably beginning to phase out.
Mm,
And I see MSL roles, some that may be more focused on communication of medical information, for
hmm
example. There may be some, I think, that are more focused on analytics, but not just purely as data scientists, but as folk with some kind of medical or scientific background who can actually go into an institution and work with them to help mine their own data, work with them to find out what their own patient needs may be. And they're doing all that. They can do all of that at a local level. So it's
hmm
not your traditional health economics, outcomes research, data science that's done more at a national level. But you can start doing this at a local level, because sometimes there's a lot of value in the aggregate, but sometimes the local situation may be different, right? And needs a more tailored and bespoke approach. And then the other thing that I often think about, Tom, is typically in the MSL world, or in the medical affairs world for that matter, there's often been a focus on you have to be a specialist in a particular therapeutic area or a disease area. And if I look at the way that healthcare is progressing, maybe we have a role for MSLs who are generalists,
hmm
so akin to primary care, family practitioners, the nurse practitioners, the physician assistants who know enough to address some of the questions, but then if things start getting deeper or evolving, they can bring in a specialist MSL. Now, I've got my oncology MSL who's an expert in a particular oncology disease state, or my infectious disease MSL, or my rheumatology MSL. So I do think there's an opportunity for pharma in general to think a little bit differently,
Mm.
about that, and not having this one size fits all where you just basically say to everybody, hey, here's your region, you go out and talk about everything all the time. You can train people to a certain depth across a large number of therapeutic areas, as a family practitioner would. And then you have your specialists who can really go deep, and you can bring them in as the need arises.
Interesting. I didn't expect you to say that. I think the concept that you just introduced, which is the more generalist approach, is I think there's a lot of people listening to this right now that are very pleased to hear that, because the trend has been and probably continues to be, we want subject matter experts. We want specialists in a specific therapeutic area, disease state. That's been the trend. But to hear you say, I mean, it makes total sense what you're saying. And I think there's a lot of really qualified people out there that are more generalists than they are specialists that can add a lot of value to the industry. So I think that's good. That's more good news. So I think that as the career prospects for the future, and for all those aspiring MSLs listening, or people that are MSLs that would rather be in that role than be specialized, I think that's good news. But you said something before that made me think. You used the word data, and it made me think of, in your opinion, what do you think data delivery and the strategy for delivering data is going to look like for the future MSL?
So I think of data very broadly, and I think it's another area where artificial intelligence can work. And normally we think of numbers, right, and words as data, but you can look at us today on screen, and you can look at us in a month's time, and you can look at us in 6 months' time on the same screen. And if one of us is on a medication for some particular disease, you can probably use just the images and the way that we look and that we act to look at progression, right? Effectiveness of treatment or not. You can look at searches that people do online. You can track flu pretty well these days just by seeing how many people are typing flu across the globe. So that to me expands that whole concept of what we think of as data, right? And it I think helps make us more curious. I think a little bit more innovative, and then how do you harness all of that, as an MSL, right? Either when you're communicating, or whether you're bringing back insights, right, or feedback. And I think there's such a rich source there that we just have not exploited so far.
What about stakeholders? We look at the current stakeholders that are being targeted. Does that change in the future?
I think it does. We've touched on it a little bit, and often the focus has been on, I'm going to call them more academic key opinion leaders, right, who present or are on guideline committees, who work primarily prescribers. But what we see in healthcare systems now is that all of that patient management has a lot of inputs and other people touching that patient journey through the system. And the majority of them today are probably non-prescribers, right? So it could be pharmacists, it could be nurses, it could be some with limited prescribing credentials. It could be people who are completely different and are making decisions on a cost basis or some kind of economic basis. And the opportunity, I think, and then there's the patients themselves, right? And how does all of that change? for good reasons, a number of compliance frameworks that determine how MSLs interact with patients or patient advocacy groups or not at all. But I see that all of those stakeholders begin increasing. If you start looking at more public health initiatives, vaccines is always a good example. And I had the opportunity to work into vaccines for many years, but COVID brought all that to life as well. You've got your government officials, right, whether it be at a national level like the CDC, you've got your state, territorial health officials, you've got your public health city officials. And all of those, to me, are opportunities to engage on a medical basis with information that's current and that's not. And with patients, we've always got to be careful about trying to influence any treatment options, right? We always should be a step away and leave it to the healthcare providers, the healthcare practitioners to make that ultimate decision. But they're there, right? They're a legitimate stakeholder, because if they're taking one of the medicines for a company that we work for, I feel we have an obligation to be balanced and, to communicate around both safety and both efficacy. And also the ability to recognize if it's something new or different that we haven't heard before, right? And then what do we do with that information, right? Do we need a new study? Do we need to do some database analysis? All for the better good.
And what advice do you have for current MSLs to prepare for the future? Are there skills that you recommend they develop? How do they get themselves prepared?
Yeah, so for me, the key thing is don't think of a one-size-fits-all approach. Some of this may be constrained by legal compliance frameworks, but not everybody needs a 20-slide deck and take them through slide 1 to 20, right, in order, and go through a bullet. To me, it's more around the communication and telling a story, but tailoring a story. If I'm talking to pharmacists, what are the 2 or 3 key things that I want to communicate? If it's a nurse, what are the 2 to 3 things that I want to communicate? If it's a physician, what are those 2 to 3 things? If it's a CDC official, what do I need to communicate? So for me, it's taking that look and tailor your communication and your efforts to what the stakeholder needs and wants, rather than what you think that stakeholder may need or want.
And how about MSL leaders? What advice do you have for MSL leaders as they begin not begin, but if they had to look at the future, what can they do now to set their careers up and prepare for the future?
Yep. So for me, it's to take a broad view, Tom, of training for current MSLs that may have, but also look more broadly at what they're doing for recruitment. And when I say broadly, I really mean broad. One is the technical scientific credentials you may have, right? We talked about doctorates or nursing degrees or pharmacy degrees. The ability to communicate and communicate effectively and succinctly. But also when they're looking at the teams, is to think of diversity, equity, right, inclusion. We all talk about it, but to think of it holistically, right? And in every aspect. Could be race, could be ethnicity, could be gender, it could be age, and it could be a number of other things that we're not talking about. But when you start thinking like that, then you can start matching your internal expertise with the external needs. And they may not all be the same, because if you're looking after an 80-year-old, it may be very different to what you're looking for if you're treating a 30-year-old.
Right.
We've heard on the gender side of things that women are often underdiagnosed for cardiovascular disease. And just having those different perspectives, coming in and feeding into your MSL organization as a leader can only help make you better, can only help make you more effective. And I think at the end of the day, it results in better patient care and outcomes.
Yeah. And that's always the goal, right?
Always the goal.
Awesome. Well, Eddie, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for being here. That was an amazing conversation. I knew it wouldn't disappoint. And I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Same here, Tom. Absolutely. Appreciate you as well. And thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. And guys, thank you as always. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing this episode and all of the support that you've given this podcast over the years. You guys are the best, and I appreciate you tuning in every week, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much for listening to the show, and if you enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss an episode in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.